Inside the car, Rust finds a young woman slumped over the steering wheel and shot multiple times in the back.
I think I put my hand on her shoulder and asked her, "Can you talk? Can you say anything?" And she just kind of moaned a little bit, and I could see her eyes. Her eyes were closed, but her eyes kind of flickered like she was trying to open them, but she was never able to say anything at all.
The attack is less than an hour old when police take a call from a man claiming to be the Rock Spring shooter.
He said something, in fact, that there's been two persons shot out at the park, and he said something to the effect that I also shot those two kids last year. And then he said kind of tauntingly, "Goodbye."
The call is traced to a payphone just blocks from the police department. The receiver hangs off the hook, but no usable prints are lifted.
You know, that's an unusual event, really unusual. And, you know, we followed up on that as much as we could, but unfortunately, you know, the phone where the call was placed and everything ran into pretty much a dead end.
At the scene, the victims are ID'd as 22-year-old Darlene Ferrin and 19-year-old Mike Mageau, two locals from Vallejo. Darlene dies in the ambulance on her way to the hospital. Mageau, however, survives and tells Ed Rust this story. He claims Darlene picked him up at his house around 11:30. She needed to talk, so they went out to the springs.
He said they'd just been there just a very few minutes, turned the headlights off, she had the radio playing, and a car pulled up behind them, and the person got out and was carrying a flashlight. And he said something to her, "Oh, it's the cops," or something like that.
The flashlight plays over the couple, and then Mageau hears the muffled report of shots being fired.
He says that this person just kept shooting. He's trying to get away, and he crawled over clear into the back seat. And then he heard more shots and saw that Darlene was being shot.
After shooting Darlene, the attacker walked away from the car, then returned.
And he said this person actually turned around and came back and reached in the back and shot him 2 more times, I believe. And then shot Darlene 2 more times.
Mageau gives police a description of the attacker. A white man, young, stocky, about 5'8", with brown curly hair. Beyond the sketch and the phone call, however, there is precious little evidence to work with. At the first scene, the killer left .22 caliber shell casings. At the second, 9mm slugs. In time, both shootings go cold, barely making a ripple outside Solano County. That, however, would quickly change. In the editorial room of the San Francisco Chronicle, a curious state of affairs is developing. The board of editors is on the receiving end of a letter from a man claiming to be the Vallejo killer and offering intimate details of the crimes as proof. The missive is double-posted, marked "Please rush to editor," and signed with a crossed circle, a mark that would later become known as the Zodiac symbol. In 1969, Robert Graysmith is editorial cartoonist for the paper.
We start getting these very bizarre letters, and they're codes and threats. And the guy's saying, "You print this code in your paper," and he sent one to each of the major papers, "or I'm going on a killing rampage." Well, that's just simply, we'd never seen anything like this.
The codes contained in the letters are 8 lines long, each line containing 17 symbols. The killer claims that if decoded, these ciphers will reveal his identity.
And no one could break these ciphers. The NSA, the FBI, nobody could break them. But a high school teacher in Salinas, California, sat down with his wife over the weekend, and they just simply did not let up, and they found the motive for the killer's crimes.
Working at their kitchen table, Donald and Betty Harden unlock the key to the code.
Harden said to himself, "You know, this guy's so egotistical. The first word is going to be I." And going on this basis, which is like a triangle, he said, "Okay, this is I all the way through." And he says he likes to kill. Kill, double L's. He's looking for double L. Double L is a very valuable clue, because if you see doubled symbols, then you can pretty much guess. This is the most common double.
In short order, the code comes apart. It reveals not the killer's name, but his motive for killing.
What Hardin came up with, just off the top of my head, I like killing because killing people is the most dangerous game in the world.
The newspaper ciphers are the first moves in the most dangerous game of serial murder, played by a man who would soon be known to the world as the Zodiac. Twilight in California's Napa Valley. The sun is low, casting long shadows across Lake Berryessa. On shore, a picnic is laid out. Nearby, the picnickers struggle to stay alive. Each has been bound hand and foot and stabbed repeatedly. Out on the lake, the fisherman hears the couple's cries and summons police.
And I believe we just finished dinner when I got a call from the office indicating a couple of kids that were at Lake Berryessa had been stabbed.
The victims are hanging on. Ken Narlow rushes to the hospital to get their statements. Meanwhile, a little over an hour after the attack, Napa County Police Officer Dave Slate takes in a call.
I answered the phone. I said, Napa Police Department, Officer Slate. And the voice on the other end says, I want to report a murder, no, a double murder. And the voice on the other end of the phone said, I'm the one that did it.
So we sent people out around town to see if we could find a telephone off the hook at a public phone booth, and a roving reporter for the local media found this telephone at a phone booth right downtown Napa.
The phone booth is less than 5 blocks from Napa's police station. Forensics dusts for prints and comes away with a palm print. Back at the hospital, the victims are identified. The woman, 22-year-old Cecilia Shepard, never regains consciousness and dies from 10 stab wounds to the back and chest. Her companion, 20-year-old Brian Hartnell, survives and tells Detective Narlow his story.
I kept trying to talk to him.
He said that Cecilia was kind of startled, and Brian said, what's the matter? She says, well, there's a man standing over there, and he's staring at us. And then a little while later, she heard another noise, and that's when she saw the suspect come out from behind a tree. She looked up and she says, oh my God, there he is again, he's wearing a mask.
The man who approaches them is about 5'10". He's wearing gloves, carrying a gun in one hand, and has a long bayonet-style knife at his side. Over his head, the man wears a black executioner-style hood. On his chest is the crossed circle, the sign of the Zodiac. The masked man uses pre-cut lengths of rope to bind his victims. Then he pulls out the knife.
And then he supposedly said, well, you know, I'm going to have to kill you. And Brian is supposedly have said, well, kill me first because I couldn't stand to see Cecilia hurt.
After talking to Hartnell, Narlow realizes he is not dealing with your run-of-the-mill murderer. Clues left at the crime scene underscore this point. Scrawled on the side of Brian Hartnell's car is a message from a man who now calls himself the Zodiac.
It had the sign of the Zodiac, the circle with the cross emblem. Then he had the date, September 27th, 1969. Underneath that, he had by knife, which naturally attracted our attention because it was directly related to the crime itself, and he was taking credit for it.
Also scrawled on the side of the car, 12/20/68 and 7/4/69, the dates of the 2 Vallejo attacks. The killer leaves no doubt he is responsible for all 3 attacks and wants everyone to know it. His next attack ups the ante even further as Zodiac turns up in the big city. Downtown San Francisco, a little before 10 p.m. Cabbie Paul Stein picks up a fare in front of the St. Francis Hotel and takes a 10-minute drive to the big money neighborhood of Presidio Heights. The fare directs Stein to stop at the corner of Washington and Cherry Streets, puts a 9mm pistol to the cabbie's head, and pulls the trigger. Across the street and up a flight of stairs, a teenage girl happens to look out the window. She sees a man get out of the cab and begin to wipe down the outside of the car. After a bit, he walks down Cherry Street toward 1,400 acres of park known as the Presidio. The teen's brother picks up the phone and calls police.
217 was called with the radio code, meaning a shooting had possibly come down.
Shortly after 10, San Francisco patrolman Armand Palisetti responds to the call and approaches the cab.
It was actually pretty gory. I looked in, and the cab driver was laying down, and his head was basically resting on the floorboard of the car. The car was full of blood. The gentleman's eyes were open, which was a very bad sign, indicating that he was dead.
Palisetti takes down a description of the shooter, a white man, reddish hair, and a crew cut, about 5 feet 10. In the moments after the attack, one patrol comes across such a man, fitting the suspect's general description and walking away from the shooting.
The other unit stopped somebody, a white man, and asked if he had seen anything suspicious or anybody in the area. And that person said, yes, a man just ran into the Presidio.
The patrol lets the man go. Later, many would wonder if they let Zodiac himself slip away into the night.
The conjecture is that this was the Zodiac. Was it? I don't know. He didn't see any blood on that person's clothing. And believe me, based on the crime scene, there would have been a lot of blood on that person.
Back at the crime scene, Paul Stein is pronounced dead. In his cab, a spent shell casing from the 9mm slug that took his life. And the best piece of evidence in the case, fingerprints smudged in blood and thus almost certainly left by the killer. Detectives believe Paul Stein's killer has made his mistake, and his capture is just a matter of time. 3 days later, another letter arrives at the Chronicle, and San Francisco realizes Paul Stein's killer is not just another pretty face. On October 10, 1969, San Francisco cabbie Paul Stein is shot execution style in the front seat of his car. 3 days later, the San Francisco Chronicle receives a letter double-posted and addressed in blue felt-tip pen. The return address has been replaced by a crossed circle. The first line reads, "This is the Zodiac speaking."
I can remember the Chronicle publishing a letter, and it was, "This is the Zodiac speaking," and he described the murder scene. And I found that quite chilling.
More chilling than the letter's detail is what accompanies it. Pieces of Paul Stein's bloody shirt.
The piece of shirt in the letter made it very clear that the person that was writing was the murderer.
In it, Zodiac taunts police. He writes, "The San Francisco police could have caught me last night if they had searched the park properly, instead of holding road races with the motorcycles, seeing who could make the most noise." Then Zodiac shares his plans for the future, increasing the quotient of terror exponentially.
He said he's going to shoot school children. I'm going to shoot them as they came bounding off the bus.
School children make fine targets. I think I shall wipe out a school bus some morning. Just shoot out the front tire and then pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out.
Later on, he's got diagrams of bombs. You got an electronic eye. It's going to count the numbers of windows in the school bus. It's at the height of a school bus. It's buried in the cliffside. As soon as the school bus goes by, it's going to detonate and kill these kids. Two diagrams. They look at them. These things will work.
This guy is a pathological psycho killer. There's no doubt about it.
With the Stein murder and subsequent letter, Zodiac is finally where he wants to be, at the very center of attention, holding a major American city under his thumb. Mel Nicolai is a special agent with the California Department of Justice.
You had to believe it. I mean, you couldn't discount it. You had to take it into consideration because he'd already killed several people, and why wouldn't he shoot some kids?
Now, of course, the reaction was they've got small fixed-wing planes flying behind the buses. People volunteer their own time as armed guards. There's squad cars.
It was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. It is your worst fear, you know, to have children threatened and to have the possibility of children killed for no purpose whatsoever other than to kill.
With confirmed Zodiac attacks in Vallejo, Napa, and now San Francisco, the chase is on. An army of detectives hoping to catch the country's most notorious killer, and in the process, perhaps make themselves a career.
One officer told me, he said, this is the ace of cases. The guy who solves this is going to be the greatest detective there ever was. And so what you had is you had competing police departments in Napa and Vallejo and San Francisco, and eventually Riverside, California, and even Oakland PD. And these people are all competing against each other.
In my mind, it was kind of like a poker game. You see all these different police from different agencies, they're kind of like holding their cards. I don't know, what do you got?
Hoping to head off such problems, Mel Nikolai convenes an official Zodiac task force, a place where police could share information and hopefully not step on each other's toes.
San Francisco and Napa and Solano and Vallejo PD, they all came together pretty fast. Once they determined who, you know, they're all working on the same individual.
It was kind of a brainstorming session. We'd bring our files up there and all the detectives would get together that are working on the case and make sure that we were touching base with one another and they were all privy to the same information.
The task force focuses on its best leads. The bloody print pulled from Paul Stein's cab, and the Zodiac letters written most likely in the killer's hand.
The letter forms are rather childish, unskilled.
John Shimoda is one of several handwriting experts poring over script from the Zodiac letters.
I put myself zeroed in looking for the letter K because three-stroke letter K, and usually people don't make that type of K with that type of stroke.
Using handwriting experts and fingerprint cards, detectives shuffle through hundreds of suspects and field thousands of calls from an anxious public.
Phone calls and from all over the country, California and all over. They were calling names of people they thought might be responsible. Everybody had an idea who it might be, you know.
Bits and pieces of information, leads and tips from people who want to help catch the Zodiac killer have been pouring into police headquarters here at the Hall of Justice for the last few days.
We were getting hundreds and hundreds of them, and you know, we didn't have computers in those days, and all we had was a little file index, and we'd put the name on the suspect on a 3x5 card and put the physical description down and how we eliminated them through prints or handwriting, and that was it.
While the task force struggles, Zodiac enjoys himself writing more letters and reveling in his newfound status as a celebrity.
You were dealing with a highly intelligent man who wanted to tell you who he was, and yet couldn't. You know, he wanted the publicity, he wanted the ego, and I think the publicity eventually became the driving force behind his crimes.
In one greeting card sent to the Chronicle, Zodiac demands that the people of San Francisco start wearing some nice Zodiac buttons. Zodiac writes, "Everyone else has these buttons like the peace symbol, Black Power. Well, it would cheer me up considerably if I saw a lot of people wearing my button." In a second letter, Zodiac writes, "The bomb is set up like this," and then provides police with a page of schematics. Zodiac ends with, "I hope you have fun trying to figure out who I killed."
He called it his game of outdoor chess. And I think what Zodiac battled with the police, that became it. It was him against the police. He outwitted them, he gave them clues, he told them when he was going to strike.
Zodiac even corresponds with San Francisco's rich and famous. Prominent among them, San Francisco attorney Melvin Belli, who receives a letter with a scrap of Stein's shirt in it. Eventually, however, the Zodiac decides it is time to stop writing letters and begin killing again. Five months after the Stein murder, Kathleen Johns and her daughter travel a highway 65 miles southeast of San Francisco. A car pulls alongside and motions to Johns, who pulls over.
Says, "You know, something wrong with your tire. Let me fix it." So he gets out and he goes around back. "It's okay now," he says. "And it's deserted." She drives a couple feet. Tire rolls off, and he's loosened the lug nuts. He says, oh my God, this is terrible. Let me drive you somewhere. Well, as soon as he gets going, he turns off the road. And then for the next hour, I'm going to kill you. You're next. I'm going to get you.
The car winds down empty country roads. The driver, a stocky white man, talks in a monotone, telling Johns he is going to kill her, and then throw the baby out after her. Finally, the driver comes upon a freeway and begins to turn.
He starts to turn into the wrong way onto a freeway. He's paused, going to back up. She leaps out. She's got her baby, pregnant, runs into a field, throws herself face down. He's coming through the field with this light. You know, come back, I won't hurt you. And she's absolutely silent. So he finally gives up because a truck comes around the bend, illuminates him in the road, and he takes off.
A driver passing by takes Johns to the local police station where she spots a composite on the wall, a sketch of the celebrated Zodiac killer.
There's this sketch made from the witnesses of the Stein killing. That's him. That's the guy.
In July, the Chronicle receives another letter, verified by handwriting experts as coming from the Zodiac's hand. In it, the author writes about giving a woman and her baby a rather interesting ride for a couple of hours one evening a few months back. John's encounter is the last verified sighting of the Zodiac. In subsequent letters, the killer hints that he might go silent and continue to kill without any further letters.
Zodiac did something really clever. He's really playing with people's minds. He says, I'm not going to tell you when I'm going to kill anymore. He says, I'm going to make them look like accidents.
Zodiac's last known letter is received in January of 1974. In it, the killer praises a newly released film called The Exorcist and gives the police a final body count. 37 people to date, the Zodiac claims he has killed. After this final letter, Zodiac makes good on his promise and disappears.
Back in those days, nobody wanted to say, well, he stopped, right? Because if you come out and you sell a sandwich, says, well, it's all over with now, he stopped. And then 2 days later, he goes out and shoots somebody, says, hey, I haven't stopped yet, see, here's proof. You know, don't egg the guy on in any way. So everybody's kind of kept quiet.
Detectives, however, already have a line on the man they believe to be the Zodiac, a man who lives in a trailer filled with small dead animals. On September 27, 1969, Cecilia Shepard and Brian Hartnell are attacked as they picnic on the shores of Lake Berryessa. Their assailant wields a knife and wears an executioner's hood with the Zodiac symbol on his chest. Cecilia dies from multiple stab wounds. Brian lives but never sees the Zodiac's face. On that same day, 36-year-old Arthur Lee Allen tells family members he is going scuba diving in Lake Berryessa. He returns that evening, covered in blood, with a knife on the front seat of his car. A tip is phoned in to police. Take a look at Arthur Lee Allen as the Zodiac. George Bawart is a detective with the Vallejo PD.
John Lynch interviewed him, and Arthur Lee Allen told him, yeah, I told everybody I was going to Berryessa, but instead I went to the ocean seaside, and I met some folks down there, and I cut up their chicken for them, and we barbecued, and then I came home, and that's their chicken blood on me, and so forth and so on.
Allen's story about chicken blood buys him some time. 2 years later, however, Allen's name resurfaces. A friend named Don Cheney claims Allen called himself the Zodiac before the term had ever been made public by the killer.
And he had told Cheney that he was going to hunt people with a gun with a flashlight tied to it so he could shoot them. And he's told Cheney, he says, you know, I think I'll call myself the Zodiac.
With Cheney's information in hand, investigators question Allen for a second time about the killings.
First words out of his mouth, the most dangerous game. And they say, my God, what's that? It's my favorite book. I've loved it since the 10th grade. And this was about a guy named Count Zarhoff, very similar name to Zodiac, who dressed like Zodiac, all in black, who hunted couples through the woods, carried a gun, carried a knife, carried a bow and arrow.
The phrase most dangerous game appears in code in one of the original Zodiac letters. The parallels between Allen and the Zodiac, however, do not stop there.
The intriguing thing is they're looking at his watch, and he's wearing a watch, an oversized man's watch, with a cross circle on it. This is exactly like Zodiac's symbol, and it says underneath, Zodiac.
In the role of serial killer, Arthur Lee Allen is right out of central casting. A white male, early 30s, a loner with an IQ near genius level, and a love for guns. Based on Cheney's information, detectives execute a search warrant on Allen's trailer home. Inside, they find further evidence of a disturbed mind. Small animals dissected and stored in a freezer, knives covered in blood, and sexual devices. All of it ties in with the larger profile developed. None of it, however, provides a specific link between Allen and any of the Zodiac killings. Detectives ask Allen for a set of fingerprints, hoping they might find a match to the bloody print pulled off Paul Stein's San Francisco taxicab.
So they have a print man, and they take his print. But the print guy looks up and says, it doesn't match the single print we found on the cab. Then they want to do a handwriting analysis. So they had prepared sheets, and they give him the right kind of felt tip pen Zodiac used. They have him print certain lines, left and right hand. And he's printing with his left, he's printing with his right. And they got the handwriting expert with him. And it doesn't match.
By the spring of 1973, forensics seems to clear Allen as a suspect. Bayward, however, is not convinced. In September of 1974, Arthur Allen is convicted on an unrelated charge of child molestation. He spends almost 3 years in custody, and for those years, the Zodiac letters mysteriously stop. Allen is released in August of 1977.
And about 6 months later, a letter came in. It was legitimately a Zodiac letter that said, "I'm back."
The disturbing coincidence, coupled with Allen's own statements and lifestyle, stamp him as the leading Zodiac suspect. With no print match, however, and no other forensic evidence, the investigation loses steam. The Zodiac killings stop, and the cases go cold. Ralph Spinelli sits in a San Jose jail cell and sweats. A two-time loser, he is looking at 30 years for a string of armed robberies. Anxious to make a deal, Spinelli calls in a cop and whispers the magic word, Zodiac. Spinelli's story begins in 1969. He owned a strip club in Northern California. Arthur Allen wanted a job as Spinelli's muscle. Spinelli was not interested.
Ralph Spinelli claimed that Arthur Lee Allen went to him and said, "Hey, I'll be your enforcer." And Ralph shined him off. Ralph just said, "No, you're nobody, get away from here." He said, I'll prove it to you. I'm going to do something pretty big in San Francisco tomorrow. Well, the next day, Paul Stein was killed in San Francisco. Shortly thereafter, Arthur Lee Allen came and said, "I did that in San Francisco."
Spinelli's story lights a fire under Bawart, who decides to take a final shot at the case. Bawart tracks down the only man to have seen the Zodiac unmasked, Mike Mageau. The man Zodiac shot 4 times in 1969, but failed to kill. Bawart presents Mageau with a photo lineup of suspects, among them a picture of Allen.
He looked at it about 20 seconds, took his finger and pointed at Arthur Lee Allen and said, "That's the man that shot me." So, of course, I quizzed him, "How could you be so positive after all these years?" He said, "I'll never forget that face."
Spinelli's story and Mageau's ID provide probable cause for yet another search warrant of Allen's home.
I found formulas for a fuel oil bomb. I found actually made bombs like the Zodiac described, and tons of tapes regarding the Zodiac.
The items are interesting, but not enough to warrant an arrest. Bawart interviews Allen and finds the possible killer seems anything but.
We probably talked for an hour, 10 minutes maybe about the Zodiac. You know, he'd ask him questions, he'd say, "I don't know what you're talking about." You know, but then he'd want to tell you how to make egg foo young or something, you know.
Word of Bawart's search warrant leaks, and local media swarm Allen's home. KTVU reporter Rita Williams scores an exclusive interview.
He was the prime suspect in the
one that takes place in Allen's basement and lasts more than an hour. The suspect talks a lot, but says very little.
I asked him repeatedly throughout the interview at different times, "Are you the Zodiac killer?"
No, I'm most certainly not the Zodiac killer.
And he said at times that I think that there is a Zodiac killer out there, and he's laughing at all of this. And he said, we may never know who the Zodiac killer is unless he confesses. And I said, are you ready to confess? And he said, no, of course not.
About the only way the heat will stop is if I die, that'll cure it for me, or if Zodiac himself confesses.
Arthur Allen's guilt or innocence hangs in the balance as cold case detectives return to one of the most intriguing aspects of the Zodiac legend, the letters he mailed to the public. For 30 years, they have offered glimpses into the mind of the killer. Now, with the advent of DNA, cold case detectives hope they might also offer up the Zodiac's true identity. In 1968, the Zodiac drew first blood, attacking in a lover's lane in Vallejo, California. 4 murders later, and after dozens of suspected attacks and sightings, Zodiac slipped off the California landscape, replaced by Charles Manson, Richard Ramirez, and a host of others. By 1991, the case is cold. No detective able to crack the riddle of the Zodiac and put a face to the killer. If there is a #1 suspect, his name is Arthur Lee Allen. Cold case detectives, however, have no physical evidence tying him to any of the Zodiac crimes. In 1992, fate plays a hand and things begin to change. In the summer of 1992, George Bawart is hard at work, trying to make a case for Arthur Allen as the Zodiac killer, when he gets a call.
I get a call at my home right here from a cop named Terry Barron and said, hey, George, you still looking at Arthur Lee Allen as the Zodiac? And I said, yeah. He said, well, I'm in his living room. And I said, what are you doing there? He says, he's on the floor dead.
Allen is dead from a heart attack. Before his body is committed to the ground, Bawart orders an autopsy.
I insisted on a autopsy. #1 is because he accused me of trying to kill him at some point in time. And #2 is so we could have tissue till we could get DNA.
Bawart is not sure what DNA can do for him, but he wants to be prepared. Samples of Allen's brain are frozen and stored for future testing, in case someday cold case detectives ever run down a sample of the Zodiac's DNA. Kelly Carroll is a homicide detective with the San Francisco Police Department. Like everyone else in the department, Carroll is familiar with the legend of the Zodiac.
Probably the most famous of San Francisco homicide cases in terms of unsolved cases is the Zodiac case. And literally every day we receive some type of notification, a message in the mail or a phone call. Now we even get email messages regarding this case. And so it was decided that the case would be reactivated and assigned to an active homicide team.
Carroll pulls the case files and quickly realizes his best hope for success lies with forensics.
The idea that a criminal would be aware of fingerprints and things like that and take efforts to hide or conceal or mask them is reasonable. But the idea that they would be aware of DNA and try to hide that is not reasonable.
Carroll believes the Zodiac most likely took no precautions against DNA transfer. Before a letter can be analyzed, however, a threshold determination must be made. Which of the 20 so-called Zodiac letters can be considered authentic and thus worth testing? Susan Morton is a forensic document examiner with the San Francisco PD.
There was a long letter concerning the murder of Paul Stein, and I knew that that letter had been received with a piece of the victim's bloody shirt. So there was no question that that had to be from the Zodiac.
Using the Stein letter as her Rosetta Stone, Morton is able to authenticate at least 5 Zodiac letters as genuine. Then the scientific process begins, and the case is built anew. When the Zodiac mailed a letter, he presumably licked the stamp and envelope, potentially transferring his saliva and genetic profile onto the glue. The question for forensics is the Zodiac's DNA still there? In October of 2002, San Francisco's police lab provides the answer, a partial genetic profile pulled from one of the Zodiac letters. Similar in many ways to a partial fingerprint, the partial profile is not enough to conclusively identify a particular person as the donor. It is, however, enough to start eliminating people. Kelly Carroll begins with Arthur Lee Allen and his frozen brain tissue.
It did not match the partial profile that we developed. Arthur Lee Allen did not donate the biological material that was recovered from the stamp or the Zodiac correspondence that yielded this result.
Carroll, however, is not done with Allen. In the world of fingerprints, the latest type of lift is called writer's palm.
When you write, you rest the heel of your palm, a very characteristic part of it, on the paper. And people in those days weren't really aware that you could leave a palm print and that it could be identified. They knew about fingerprints, but the public really wasn't that aware of palm prints.
Zodiac's letters are tested for palm prints. One is discovered in his final authenticated letter, the so-called exorcist letter, mailed in 1974.
They were able to obtain palm prints from Arthur Lee Allen. It was compared to the one that had been developed earlier, and they don't match. That is not Arthur Allen's palm print.
No print match, no DNA match, and no handwriting link to Arthur Lee Allen. The tools of modern forensic science appear to clear Allen as a major suspect in the Zodiac case. Frustrating cold case detectives, and adding yet another layer of intrigue to a case and a killer that for millions has now become an obsession.
He would have gotten to the car wash by 7:40 without stopping anywhere.
This is a meeting of minds. Amateur sleuths coming together to discuss their favorite killer, the Zodiac.
Here's what I think. I think he had some liquid courage, and that's where that time went, and then when he got brave and he made the phone call.
Yeah.
The group is headed up by this man, Tom Voigt. Although there are dozens of websites devoted to Zodiac, Voigt's, called ZodiacKiller.com, is the big dog on the block.
At the very beginning, I would advertise in these little message boards and news groups around the internet. I would say, here's a new Zodiac site, and then word of mouth spread. And now I get, let's see, in May of 2003, I had 997,000 hits, and it's consistently up towards 1 million.
1 million hits a month. 1 million sets of eyes poring over more than 1,200 pages of Zodiac materials. Voigt believes where cold case detectives have failed, his internet sleuths might someday prevail.
I think the police might look at some of the amateurs as being kind of like Trekkies. You know, they're kind of just wrapped up in the whole mystery of it. And sometimes it's easy to dismiss them and not realize that, you know, they have suspicions for thinking this person might be a killer. It's just a matter of getting them to communicate what those suspicions are.
There's a subset of the population that is obsessed with the case.